recording. I'm not putting a pie in the hold.
and we have a show name, Pie in the Hold.
I was going to say, this has got to be called Check a Pie. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 4 of season 2 of Bad Voltage. Welcome, we have a particularly fun show today. Should we talk about what we're doing, Jeremy?
We should. One of the things we're going to doing, and depending on the feedback on this segment potentially, we might turn this into a little bit of a series called Disassembled. But in this one, we're going to do GitLab Incident Disassembled, where we kind of break down a recent issue a database issue that GitLab recently had and how we think they handled it quite amazingly.
Right. Next week is Bad Voltage live at scale in Pasadena.
And brilliant.
And we've got a bunch of details about how the show's going to work, how you can turn up and drink all the free beer you can stuff in your pockets. So listen out for that.
And we're also going to talk about the Elementary OS people who make the desktop, free software open source desktop. They've kicked off a brand new initiative in which they're building an app store with kind of pay what you want funding, or, you know, where people can pay what they want for the application. So we're going to kind of get into this, whether this makes sense, whether it's going to be successful, and a whole load of other stuff as well.
And now, Bad Voltage. And now, on to the news.
Yes.
So you liked that, didn't you?
That was a hell of an intro there, Jeremy.
Just as I said it would be. So I'll start off on this one, and I am going to select, because there was quite a bit that happened, but I'm going to select Linux champion Munich takes decisive steps towards returning to Windows. And this was pretty widely covered, but most listeners will probably remember it was, I think, roughly a decade ago or so. Munich kind of stepped up in the movement towards open source software and government, and they switched, I believe, all of their staff, with a very couple exceptions, so thousands of people, let's say, to Linux. And they are now, because of kind of a change in government and some other things, kind of considering reversing that deal, and they just had a vote to go ahead, not with the actual switch, but with researching the switch, as governments tend to research things quite a bit. So it says after spending
a switch.
Yeah, well, potentially, yeah. So it says after spending 9 years and millions of euros on the project, today the city's politicians agreed to begin preparing to return to Windows by 2021. Under proposal backed by the General Counsel, the administration will investigate how long it will take and how much it will cost to build a Windows 10 client for the use by city employees. So what's interesting here is I don't think this is driven technically. It was driven more politically. But the one thing I thought when Munich switched, other governments, starting with other German governments and then maybe more EU governments, would make this switch, and not a lot did, which I find interesting.
I remember at the time people saying, you know, this is just the first domino to fall. And then, how every now and again you'll see, like on YouTube, someone's done one of these 10,000 cajillion domino rally things, right? And then they knock over the first domino and just the first one falls over and that's it. And then everyone kind of goes, right? That's what happened here, right? No one. You had them, and you had the Guarda Linux people who are somewhere in Spain, I think, and that's about it. And,
right. I mean, there was the French police force as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously politically driven, and there's been a bunch of talk in the open source community about, this is just because the guy at the top doesn't like Linux, and you think, well, okay, but equally, the only reason it got in the first place is because the guy at the top did like it, right? It was just as politically driven when it went our way.
Well, I think the more worrying thing here is part of this resolution, they also back the use of quote-unquote market standard software, which provides also quote-unquote the highest possible compatibility with internal and external software, which really casts into doubt really the long-term use of almost all open source. LibreOffice was mentioned, Thunderbird was mentioned, which would mean a move back to Office, obviously. So it's more worrying that it's going to impact more than just Linux in general open source usage in that government.
I would like to use this moment for a minor rant about LibreOffice. So I'm a big fan of LibreOffice. Have been for many years. I think the team do amazing work, particularly like they took this huge code base and they've refined it and modularized it. They do great stuff. So this is no issue with the LibreOffice team whatsoever. Well, one of the things, I actually wrote a blog post about this a few years ago. I'm not sure if this is still the case, so this might not be the case anymore. But one of the things that the LibreOffice team were doing is they were shipping filters that were knowingly broken. I remember one of them was a Keynote filter. I tried to load a Keynote presentation into LibreOffice, I think it was, and it was it was beyond broken, right? Sweet. I mean, it was horrendous. And my argument is, I know you probably, if I remember right, the response was, well, we want to switch that on so people know it's broken so that it can be fixed, so we can find contributors to fix it. But in my mind, it's like, no, you're shipping something that doesn't work. And with people like governments, I imagine they look at these kinds of things and then they're like, well, we're not going to use that. It's completely broken. And then it reflects on it leaves a perception that the quality of the rest of the suite might not be very good.
Right.
So,
that strikes me as something you should enable in like a beta version or a dev version, but not in a final version.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's like going to McDonald's and saying, hey, I found a turd in my fries. And they go, yeah, we just put that in there so you're grateful for all the rest of the fries. Doesn't work like that.
Each fry before that tasted so much more delicious, didn't it?
Speaking of which, I had one of those giant Big Macs, by the way. And I'm not sure if it was any good or not.
Is this your news item out of curiosity?
Sorry, no, it's not. Just aside. Anyway, actually, I might have two pieces of news now. Anyway, so all right.
What?
Should we move on?
No, right. I'm sorry. I've got to ask. What the hell is a giant Big Mac? Is it just what I think it is?
I also don't know. So.
Oh wow! Maybe this is just something that exists in my world. So the normal Big Mac, available everywhere.
Yeah.
They've made a smaller version of the Big Mac. I think it's like the Big Mac Mini or something like that. And then they've made
Shouldn't it just be called the Mac then?
The Mac, yeah.
Why would you have big and mini in the same?
There's the Big Mac, the Mac, and the bigger Mac. I think it's called the Grand Mac, which I'm assuming was originally called the Grand Mac Daddy, and then there was some kind of issue with that name. And it's basically just a giant Big Mac, right? It's got a couple of big burgers in it, and it's got that Mac sauce. That people seem to think Big Mac sauce is the best thing in the world. It's not, right? It just isn't.
So they took an already enormous hamburger and made it more enormous. Does everyone in the restaurant do they all stand up and sing the Star Spangled Banner when you buy it?
Well, the thing is, it's not enormous. A Big Mac is not very big at all. It's. I think it's kind of like how wagon wheels were for us back.
Right.
Like,
okay.
When we were kids, wagon wheels were the size of a dinner plate, and now. It's the size of a 10-pence coin.
It's the size of a pound coin, yeah.
Yeah, anyway. So there you go. This is the kind of news you were looking for.
That is your bonus news right there.
Bonus news on the large Mac or whatever it's called. Right, okay, my piece of news is slightly more technical than that.
All right, let's do it.
The next stable version of Chrome, the next release of Chrome, won't allow you to disable a bunch of the built-in plugins. The two big ones are the Widevine DRM plugin and the PDF plugin. Now, both of those two things, they're supplied as part of Chrome, and you need the Widevine DRM one to watch things like Netflix. They build in a PDF reader. They are quite handy, but now you're not going to be allowed to turn them off. Right? And I find Chrome's PDF viewer really, 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 really annoying. Because
Does it open PDFs?
Most of the time, most of the way, yes.
Okay. So there's times when it doesn't open PDFs or they don't render right.
It doesn't zoom in properly as well as Evince does. It doesn't show me the nice cut table of contents. I have a PDF reader and it's good, right? Allow me to use it.
Right. And this you can still use it, right?
No, not anymore. That's the point. If you click on a PDF in Chrome...
Well, you can download the PDF and then open it in your PDF browser of choice, but you cannot... If you just click on it, it will automatically open it in...
And if you download it and click on the button in the download bar, it opens in Chrome's PDF viewer, unless you've turned it off, which you're now not going to be able to.
So,
so why are they doing this?
Depends on who you ask.
Google. If you ask Google,
if you ask Google, they would say, well, these things are convenient. They're an important part of the bundled product. And they're an important part of the overall experience. Why would it be a good idea to disable them? No one wants that.
Right.
If you ask people who don't like Chrome, they would say, yeah, this is just more of the same from Google, isn't it?
Isn't it because they're removing plugins, though? The old NP API plugins are no longer, those are the last two that were popular. So that seems to me
they're removing. They're removing plugins of that way, but since they've got some things which are still implemented as plugins, just going on that these are our favoured plugins, so they're still allowed, and now you can't turn them off. Look, we've stopped plugins. Seems to me to be obeying the letter rather than the spirit of the law.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Wow. Well,
yes.
I honestly don't care either way. I think I open up PDFs.
Does Safari have plugins? I don't know. You tell me.
I don't use Safari. I don't.
Boom.
Yeah, that was a pretty limp-wristed mic drop, but a mic drop nonetheless. All right.
It was more of a mic put down gently.
It was gently placed and cradled into the mic box, and then responsibly shipped back to FedEx.
So, right. Last news item. What do you got?
All right. So, in Jono's continuing series of vehicular bobbins, I'm going to. I wonder if vehicularbobbins.com exists. If it does, please register. If it doesn't, please register it and redirect it to badvoltage.com .org. All right. So, UPS are building a rolling warehouse. So this is a system in which a drone is deployed from the roof of a UPS truck and flies at an altitude of 200 feet to the destination, and it returns after dropping off the package while the truck is already on its way to the next stop. So from the Bloomberg article, it says, launching an unmanned aerial vehicle from the roof of a UPS truck about a quarter mile to the blueberry farm outside of Tampa, Florida. The drone will drop off a package at a home or property and return it to the truck, which has moved about 2,000 feet. So this sounds like basically a flying Amazon locker. I keep seeing things.
I don't think this is too bad. I mean, we, a notable podcast of our acquaintance did listen to the whole Amazon delivers everything with drones idea and pissed on it from a great height. But a large portion of that was the idea that they'd fly from Cambridge all over the country or whatever. Whereas this deals with that problem largely, right? It's not a terrible idea. Is it? You've still got the problem of where the hell does a drone land near my flat? But it's not, a wholly terrible idea, surely. And it means that they don't have to park somewhere. It means that things are moving faster and faster around in cities and things like that. Isn't this like... You remember Paperboy, the game, when we were kids?
Yes.
Where you wrote and it flung a paper into the front door. Isn't that sort of a 21st century equivalent of that?
It may be. I'm just now thinking about what the modern version of Paperboy is going to be. Is it going to be that everybody who play the game, everybody gets a medal, and you drive around in the BMW that your dad bought you? That's kind of like a
it's the first time you throw the paper through someone's car window, you get sued. Is the current version.
No, I think what happens is the guy rides down the street and then he tries to fling it into someone's house, but no one can afford to buy houses anymore because we bought them all. So
I actually don't think there'll be a game at all because I don't think kids want to do any work anymore. So anyway, I do think that this is quite a good idea. I think the potential for drones is brilliant. I just wonder what this is arguably going to work better because we still have line of sight laws, at least in the US, around drones.
Right.
And if it's going within a couple of 100 feet, then it will be line of sight, arguably. Maybe not in the cities.
I can say it depends where you are. If you live in a field, perhaps. If you live in Manhattan, not as convinced.
Right. But that's going to be the thing. Like the technology is clearly moving forward. I think we're going to start seeing in the next 10 years drones all over the place. So I like it personally. So it's not bobbins. I was wrong.
Because this is not all that bobbins. It's still a bit bobbins because it's got the word drone in it, but it's not totally unreasonable.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. News done.
And that's the news.
A few weeks ago, there was an interesting incident happened with GitLab, who are the fairly well-known code hosting and development platform, somewhat similar to GitHub. Essentially, in a nutshell, there was a fairly serious database incident, and they lost around 6 hours of data. So that's issues, merge requests, users, comments, snippets, etc., etc. I was under the impression that this was due to some kind of denial of service attack, but it seems like it was actually more some kind of Fat fingering was going on?
Yes, it's more complicated than that. As with all of these things, there's a large cascading thing of failure. The actual thing which caused the problem was basically an engineer fat fingering something, yeah? But
he thought he was on a machine. He thought he was on a different machine than he was actually on.
Yeah, but that's not actually meant to be that big a problem. Right? If that happens, you go, oh no, I'm an idiot, and restore from a backup. The problem was when they did that, the bloke went, oh no, I'm an idiot, I'll restore from a backup, and then it turned out the backup wasn't there. And then if you look at why the backup wasn't there, there was a thing where it wasn't being written to S3, and it wasn't being written to S3, and it was sending emails about that, but the emails didn't have DMARC turned on, and so the emails weren't getting through to people. And the thing you're thinking of, Monsieur Jono Bacon, is that there was a large amount of database load going on, some of which was caused by spam. So not quite a DDoS attack, but the second thing was the system was in the process of removing a GitLab employee. Right, who was obviously in loads of places in the database. So the process for removing that employee was taking up a lot of database time. And as an extra bonus, the employee didn't need to be removed. They got reported for abuse. Right, incorrectly by someone trolling, but the people who read the abuse reports didn't make it obvious. You should have put in big red writing, this bloke works for GitLab, don't remove them. And he didn't make that very obvious, so they got scheduled for removal. So, as with all of these things, this is a sequence of things go wrong.
Right. Well, what was interesting to me was when this happened, obviously I started seeing this on Twitter initially. From the minute this kind of kicked off to the ultimate conclusion of this, I believe GitLab handled this in possibly the most elegant way I've ever seen a company handle something like this. So, in summary, first of all, when this started happening, GitLab were pretty open on Twitter. Like, a surprising level of openness. I mean, I remember one tweet where at one point they said, we've tried 5 different things to kind of get this resolved, and we're still having issues with it. And generally, with most companies, they'll typically say, we're looking into it, and then you'll hear nothing until it's back online. But the other thing that they did was they created a Google Doc, which was kind of like a central place where people started feeding into it, and they were updating people. And this had like a timeline that was forming, some recovery efforts that were going on, problems that we're experiencing. And the other thing which I thought was particularly interesting is that they kicked off a YouTube live stream while this was going on, arguably at the time when a company is most vulnerable. Right. And GitLab, and there's, it's not like they're something that no one's heard of. Like, a lot of people are using GitLab. They kicked off this live stream. So to me, like, the level of openness and transparency that they demonstrated here was phenomenal. And what was interesting as well was I saw on Twitter, like, this hashtag HugUps, I think it was, kicked off. And just the level of support that the community got behind them, I thought was incredible. Like, in my mind, obviously as a bit of a community nerd, it demonstrated that, like, when you're open about these things, when you're transparent about these things, like, the community gets behind you. And I thought it was an interesting point of discussion because I've never seen a company like react in that way before. I've always seen, just it goes dark until it's resolved again. And then at best you might get like a bit of information about what happened. Right. But, they wrote essentially an autopsy.
So I'm really impressed with GitLab on 2 different things here. One of them is the amount of just transparency that has evolved, because there's a lot, to be quite frank, somewhat embarrassing information contained in the post-mortem, right? Their PG dumps didn't work, and their LVM snapshots didn't work, and their Azure disk snapshots didn't work. Like, the amount of cascading failures involved are a little bit embarrassing. And the fact that they were so, from an organizational perspective, were so open and allowed to share that amount of information, I think is really, really impressive and should be applauded. The other thing I think was very impressive also organizationally is they didn't fire the engineer. They didn't demote the engineer. They didn't get mad at him or blame him publicly. In fact, they allowed him to talk about it very publicly after the fact, and to admit that every engineer has made mistakes. Anyone who's done any meaningful sysadmin has had that one moment where you pressed enter and you were like, Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Everyone has had that. So
Yep,
to embrace that everyone has done that, and in this case it was very public, and that's unfortunate, but to, I think, organizationally accept that human error occurred, and they've put processes in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Organizationally, I'm very impressed with GitLab on this one.
I think I would take small issue with something you said, Jono, which is that other companies do this. If you look at when Google have a problem, for example, they write very detailed post-mortems, and they're similar to this. You know, this thing happened, and this was the mistake, and we should have caught it, but we didn't because of this thing that went wrong. And quite often there's a lot of admission of fault there. You know, it's like, okay, yeah, we screwed up here, and the thing we screwed up wasn't making the mistake in the first place. Is that we've been talking for ages about having a recovery procedure and never got around to it, or something like that. That's good. The difference here, I think, is that Google are transparent about this kind of thing after it's happened. They'll write a very detailed post-mortem, but GitLab were transparent about it while
during
it was happening.
Right.
And I think you can look at this from two perspectives, in my opinion. If you're some kind of terrible economics person who thinks that everyone does something because they're self-motivated, right? Everyone's a rational utility maximizer, then GitLab are doing this because the thing they have over their rival, right? Assume their rival is GitHub here. The thing they have over GitHub is that they are open. They are transparent. Their stuff is open. They've got a much more open policy with things. And this just reinforces that. And from a, niceness point of view, they say they're not doing it because they want the appearance of looking open. They genuinely are. They genuinely do believe in this transparency thing.
I think that's the key part there. Right?
That was the thing that impressed me was companies always talk about things like, you need to embrace failure and you need to learn from it. And there's an opportunity buried in every obstacle and things like that. And companies always talk about this, but they don't necessarily implement that all of the time. And the thing that really impressed me here was, I don't know GitLab extensively, but I've done a little bit of work with them, and I know their CEO reasonably well, Sid Sijbrandij. And, he's a really focused, this guy has got a bit between his teeth to succeed, right? There's no doubt about that. And in those kinds of scenarios, I think usually the insecurities of people come out and then they become defensive, they become argumentative. And I'm sure it was one hell of a tense situation behind the scenes.
Right.
But it just impresses me that in like you said, during that moment when it's going on, that they behave that way. And I would actually go so far as to say, even though this was a bad experience for GitLab, I think it's left a really good taste in people's mouths. In many ways...
This is going to sound stupid, right? But they had a major disaster, this sort of thing. And to be clear, when we say, they lost 6 hours worth of data, I'd say they only lost 6 hours worth of data. They lost loads more, but managed to recover a bunch of it.
And they didn't lose anyone's actual code, which I think would have been a different conversation.
But I've come out of this now. Normally, if I heard about that happening to a company, there'd be a black mark against them in my head. Next time someone said, "Oh, should we use this? Should we use GitLab?" I'll be like, but don't they lose data all the time?" But I've come out of this completely not thinking that. If anything, I feel better about GitLab than I did before, despite the fact they lose data. That's a masterful piece of marketing and community engineering. Right there, right? That's absolutely
it would be
gold standard.
In some kind of dystopian universe, you could imagine someone saying, "You know what we should do? We should have this cascading failure of issues." I mean, I don't believe for a second that happened there. But the thing that strikes me as well is, in that scenario, when it goes down, when you have these issues and the engineering team are trying to bring it back, and there's all these problems that are being unsurfaced, this is a time when I can imagine some plastic-haired marketing person saying, "Hey, this is an opportunity for us to turn this into blah, 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 blah." And I don't believe that happened at GitLab. I think it was just so implicit. They were like, the right thing for us to do, people are freaking out, the right thing for us to do is create a Google Doc and maybe kick off the live stream. I bet there was absolutely zero consideration for a wider marketing arc, what this might look like. No. And just instead, we need to keep people updated. And that just happened to be a masterful act of marketing in many ways.
There's I had this discussion with some people on there's Birmingham.io forum here in Birmingham for the tech community, right? And there was a firm who were saying what we're doing is we're thinking about bringing someone in to have a look over our code, give us some pointers on where it might be improved, where it might be tightened up, and so on and so forth. And a guy popped up and he said, "You shouldn't be saying that sort of thing publicly. It will lead people to not have confidence in your product." And I'm like, what? No, that's completely the opposite of what you want. The fact that you're prepared to have someone come in and look at this stuff is paradoxically a sign that you do have confidence in your product because you want to make it better and you're being open about that. But the argument is people like us do see GitLab do this and think of it. But someone who's not necessarily as invested... emotionally, I mean, not monetarily, is going to look at that and think, oh, but they lost a lot of data. And the same thing is happening to all the other firms they do trust. They just don't hear about it.
Right. I'm curious whether, like, one question for you guys is, I don't know how big GitLab are. I think they're like 100 odd people, or maybe a bit more than that.
I think like 150, 160, something like that.
Right. It strikes me that this becomes more complicated to do when you get bigger. Or not so much when you get bigger, but when you start bringing in people who don't necessarily come from the world that we come from, right? So,
yes.
So to provide a comparison, I don't believe it would have had, if this happened to GitHub, I don't believe this would have worked out this way. I think GitHub would have been open in the autopsy. I think GitHub are a really open company and they do great work. So this is no bagging on GitHub. But I can't imagine for the life of me the live stream and the Google Doc and things like that.
No way. You'd have got a post-mortem afterwards. And I bet you the post-mortem would have had to go through PR and they'd have gone, well, we shouldn't say that. And we shouldn't say that.
Well, I think GitLab is still at its size and just organizationally a very engineering-led company. And GitHub has reached a point where, while they're kind of engineering-led, there's a lot of marketing, there's a lot of other parts to the company that have gotten a large say. And that comes across in their messaging.
Right. Yeah, so I wonder whether that's, and that's nothing, obviously, I mean, that's nothing specific to GitHub. That's just what happens as companies get bigger.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether that is a function of the size or whether that is a function of the people who come in. Because there's no doubt to me, in my mind, having got to know Sid and got to know other people who work at GitLab, that like the people who go to work at GitLab are very much people who have a very kind of like recognizable mindset, a very similar mindset.
Yeah, and if I were defending GitHub, which I'm not particularly, GitLab sounds really good to me after this, but I would say that GitHub would say, yeah, we were like that when we were small.
Right.
Yeah. Whether it's the truth or not, I don't know. And yeah, you look at C.T. Bond, and he's not only smart guy, the one time I talked to him, but he seems to have that cultural kind of thing in his head, and he's instilled that in the rest of the team.
Yeah.
Which is great. 100 or so of them. They had 85 people in about a year ago.
Right.
But yeah, that I think is the important point here. You can only pull this kind of trick off if you genuinely are open people. And the fact that you are open works for you, but it only works if you're full on, both barrels open all the time. If you try and use the magic waffle dust of openness to claim that you're an open company when you're not actually, it doesn't work because people can taste the phoniness.
Right.
Yeah. And the one thing I'm personally happy about with this situation, which is it must have been pretty difficult for the GitLab people, is we now have a good case study.
Yes.
Like we have a great case study of how to handle these kinds of things. And just for me as a consultant, like when I'm talking to companies, I've already referenced this like 2 or 3 times to companies as an example of why openness and transparency works. Although I think it is depending on the audience, like if this is a financial services organization, it'd be quite a bit different.
That's what I was going to say. a lot of their customers are, a lot of their users are the sort of people who will appreciate this. Firstly, because they're a developer product, and secondly, because they're a developer product competing with the major league player, right? So anyone who's not deeply invested in the culture probably hasn't even heard of GitHub, let alone uses it. Heard of GitLab, let alone used it. They're all just on GitHub because it's what they've heard of. So they have a certain amount of flexibility to be more open like this, but kudos to them for actually playing on that.
Yep, good work, GitLab. You get the Bad Vulture seal of approval.
So some of you might have seen recently that the Elementary people are starting an Indiegogo campaign to make a pay-what-you-want app store called App Center. So what this is, and I'll just read a little bit of a blurb, is... To be a truly useful, productive, and fun platform, Elementary OS needs a great ecosystem of apps. With App Center, we want to enable indie developers to easily build and distribute fast, native, open-source apps for Elementary OS. But we also want to make sure there's a clear, fair, ethical business model available that empowers people to build and enjoy great apps. Now, so what this basically is, for those that aren't aware, the App Center app, which is just a GTK3 app written in Vala, and it uses the standard package kit and AppStream and all that stuff, and then an App Center dashboard, which is a web app written in Node that serves as the development portal. And this all hooks in to GitHub. So I have some opinions on this. The first thing I want to say is the one thing I consistently like about the Elementary guys is that they are trying new and different things to try to get more money into open source. So whether they end up working or not, or you agree with them or not, that's one thing I'll say they consistently are doing, and kudos to them for that. It's awesome.
Yes.
So while I have opinions on this, I'm more interested in both of your opinions, because, Jono, you worked at Canonical for a while, obviously, and during that time they tried to have an App Center with paid. Stuart, not only did you work at Canonical during that time, but you actually worked on Ubuntu One specifically. So I'm definitely curious to hear what you two think of this idea.
One thing as well, because some of you may not know what Elementary is Elementary is basically a desktop Linux operating system. And they've built their own kind of shell and all the rest of it. And they've been somewhat opinionated on technologies that should be used to build applications, and they want it to have a very clean look and feel. And we've spoken generally pretty favorably about Elementary.
They have a very specific UX paradigm to follow,
which appears to be Elementary equals Mac, from what I can tell.
That's
which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Fair.
I'm joking. I
mean, it's not, wholly unfair either, but it's not fair.
All right, so separate segment there. Getting back to App Center.
What do you think, At? What do you think of this?
In general, I think it's a great idea. They want to give people... they're pursuing the same kind of goal that Canonical did with the Ubuntu Software Center, where they want people to be able to publish applications which are dissociated from the operating system, which are installable in an easy way, and it's easy for developers to publish applications in an easy way. And they're doing that by building on a bunch of existing third-party services to make it easy for them. One of them is GitHub. So the things you publish to App Center in their new model basically have to be open source. And you just sign into the App Center backend, say, I want to publish an application. You sign in with GitHub and then click publish this repository. They then take it, build it, run a certain amount of checks on it. So they're checking they're doing reviews on it, basically automated reviews to check that you've correctly set up the metadata. You've got an icon, it's of decent size, that kind of thing. The sort of mechanical checks you can do, and then bang, it appears in App Center, and people can run and download it. When someone buys something, all the software is in there as pay what you want. If you as the developer, you can't set a price floor or anything like that. Everything goes in there as pay what you want. And the payments are taken with Stripe Connect. Again, they're using a third-party service. Elementary are going to take 30% of payments, unless you're paying
which is high.
Unless you're paying it's not high.
30% or 50 cents, whatever is lower. So the one thing in the announcement video, they said fairly standard, 70% dev, 30% elementary.
Yeah.
That has unfortunately become standard on mobile. I don't know that that's in any way, shape, or form standard on desktop apps.
I'd be very surprised if it is.
That's where everybody buys things. Right? No one cares about desktops. where people buy software is mobile, 30% is standard. There you go. Moving on.
I would agree, but they're building a desktop. This is not a mobile platform.
No one buys software on desktop through a store. They keep trying to bring it in. The Mac
Which
App
is
Store.
what we're talking about.
The Windows
We're talking
App
about
Store.
an app store and a desktop.
Yeah, but there's no prior art here. You can't say, well, that's not standard on desktop, because the Windows App Store is not standard on desktop either. The Mac App Store is not standard on desktop. Anything you do on desktop in this vein is forging new ground, at least to some extent.
Hang on a second.
There's no prior art to begin with.
The Mac Store is not standard on desktop? Yes, it is.
It is. Yeah.
There's an integrated app store on a Mac. There's an integrated app store on Windows 10.
As there is on Windows, yes, but they're new. The point is, you can't say the Mac App Store has defined the industry and therefore not being
the Mac App Store has been around for years.
As a very brief sidebar, because I know we don't got a ton of time, do you guys think 70-30 is going to flesh out on the desktop and mobile as being the long-term sustainable, equitable share that people get?
I think that's reasonable and sustainable, yes.
So I have a complicated viewpoint about this. So full disclosure, I've backed this campaign, right? Mainly because, I mean, I don't use Elementary. I'm probably not going to use Elementary. But to Jeremy's point at the beginning of the segment, I like what these guys are doing. I like the fact that they're forging somewhat new ground and that they're trying. And they're a small team, and I think that they've accomplished a lot, and I want to support that kind of work. Right. However, I do think that this is a somewhat flawed plan in a few different ways. One is, by definition, their audience is a fairly technical audience. They're an audience of Linux users and fans, right?
They contend that most of their users do not come from Linux, but come from proprietary operating systems such as Mac and Windows. So I think their contention would be that their user base is significantly less technical than the average Linux user base. Would be their contention,
don't buy it.
I believe.
Right.
I don't buy it either way, but.
I think their definition of a less technical user is basically a less technical Linux user, which is a more technical computer user.
You might not buy that, but that's a flat out assertion. They would say absolutely that's not the case. Most of their hits come from Mac and Windows people. They believe most of their users are from Mac and Windows people. I can see there's an argument against that, but you can't just go, no, I'm sure that's not the case. Bullshit. Right?
Well, that's my opinion. I don't buy it personally. I don't think they have a large. I mean, I'm not categorically stating that's the case.
He's saying he doesn't believe it to be the case.
I just don't believe it. I just don't believe for a second that the majority of Elementary users are genuinely non-technical consumer technology users. I don't believe that. I think that they are people who maybe in the same way that Ubuntu was a more consumerized version of Linux, and people, less technical people were using Ubuntu than they were using Debian or using, freaking Puppy Linux or something like that.
So you're saying less technical is fair, not technical is not fair, if I understand you correctly. Okay.
Yeah.
Going under that premise, where were you going before that?
So
right. Anyway, the issue I have
the issue I have here is, I think what they're doing is they're building I love the idea that there's this simple integrated app store. Like the technology-wise, the way they're doing it, I think is brilliant. The thing that I think is going to be difficult is this pay what you want model. Because first of all, as we've seen and as we've talked about previously on the show, people in the Linux desktop world generally don't pay for stuff. Right? I mean, this is pretty consistent, right? Various companies have tried selling to the Linux desktop crowd, and it hasn't worked out very well. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to get developers who are going to build applications, and then they're going to stick it into the Elementary store. And what's going to happen is some people will pay, maybe, but I think most people probably won't. So it won't become a economic model. I think what it will become is essentially a tip jar. And if that's the goal of this, that's fine.
It's definitely not the stated goal of this.
Right. It seems to be presented here that this becomes an economic model for Elementary. I just don't think the reality of the world that we live in is that people are going to pay very much. Like, for example, Vocal, right, which seems like a pretty decent podcasting client, mainly because it's got the Bad Voltage logo on the Indiegogo page. Speaking personally, I would never pay money for a podcasting client. I'm just not going to do it.
Well,
I think this comes back to their contention that most of their users are Mac specifically, but also Windows users, in that Mac and Windows users are used to paying for software.
Right. And there's a couple of things here, right? First of all, the Mac App Store takes 30% of revenue, having just looked it up. But moving on from that, Imagine you're a software developer. At the moment, you publish your thing on GitHub. No one's giving you any money for it at all. You put it with no effort into Elementary App Center. At that point, maybe no one gives you any money for it, but you're no worse off. So,
and that's why I think, like I said earlier on,
bad thing.
And that's why I said earlier on, like if I think the goal of this is to provide a really simple, elegant way for people to tip people who build software in the same way that people use Patreon to support creators. I think that's brilliant, and I'm absolutely in support of that.
Secondly,
but I think the idea that this becomes an economic model, I think is.
I was going to say, I don't think anyone was contending, is this a bad thing? So I don't even think that's a realistic question to answer, because I don't know why you ever say it's a bad thing. So will this be a successful thing was more, I think, what we
okay.
Exactly.
Here is the next thing. The elementary people, I believe, think this. I wouldn't want to speak for them, but I'll certainly speak for me. Yes, you are right. There is a culture among desktop Linux users that you shouldn't have to pay for software. That culture is bullshit, right? And people should fucking pack it in. And what the elementary team want to do is forge a new culture. Part of the reason they get all uptight and narrow when you call them desktop Linux and say things like, no, our rival isn't Linux, it's Mac and Windows, is because it stops the process of building that culture where it's a normal, reasonable thing to say, yeah, okay, I like that bit of software, I'll pay $1.50 for it.
Right. I think, to be fair, I think enthusiast Linux users are traditionally not used to paying for software. Professional Linux users are, because there are very, very expensive DAWs that are Linux. There are very, very expensive video editors that are run in Linux. So the professional Linux users are very used to paying vast amounts of money for software.
Agreed.
I think it's the enthusiast users that are not used to paying for software, by and large, because they haven't really had to. So I'm curious. I'm interested to see how being GitHub only impacts this, because traditionally GitHub has not had a ton of desktop apps hosted on it. So I don't know that a majority of people, it will be a one-click thing, because desktop developers did not traditionally develop on GitHub.
But that doesn't matter.
Web developers and other developers do.
But desktop developers who were doing traditional development, by definition, weren't developing for elementary because it hasn't been around for long enough. And the elementary people are not interested. In non-elementary
if you're already
apps.
on GitHub, I'm saying I don't think most of those apps, some of them clearly will be, but I don't think a meaningful number will have already been on GitLab.
Right. But anyone who's developing apps for elementary, I don't think would find it a major problem to start putting them up on GitHub if they're not doing already, which I'm sure most of them are.
I actually really like the GitHub integration. I think it makes sense, because I think increasingly open source projects are using it. And I think that if their target audience are, people building applications like open source applications, not like the free software crowd who might be using something else, then to me, like, that integration makes sense. The challenge in my mind from the economic, that's the only bone of contention I have, is the economic model. We all think that this is a good idea, and that's one of the reasons why I back them. But to me, the challenge here is, first of all, I think people, to Jeremy's point, do pay. Professional people do pay, but they will typically pay for applications that they can't get unless they do pay for it. Yes. So there's a scarcity component. Yes. And secondly, they invariably will pay for branded applications, branded things. I think people will pay for things that are branded that they want, right? In the same way that I'm probably not going to go and pay some random little artist who puts an album out, but I will absolutely pay for the next Overkill album. So I think that, people will pay for things that they know and they want. The challenge here, in my mind, is not a technology problem; it's a marketing problem, right? And in my mind, what they need to be doing to make this work is to get the applications that people want to play into the store. And we did this at Canonical. We went through this to try and get branded, recognizable games into the store, and we got them in, and people still didn't pay for them. We got Braid in. I
don't agree with you. I understand what you're saying. I do, but I think there's a cultural problem. I don't think it's a marketing problem. I think it's cultural. I mean, maybe the marketing informs the culture, but they want to build a culture where people think it is the norm to say, here is a great piece of software, here is £1 for it. Not where the norm is to say, well, all this software is free. Why the hell would I want to have to pay? And that ship had already sailed by the time Canonical put out the thing. That ship hasn't sailed for elementary yet.
Bullshit.
That's why I said maybe.
Bullshit.
I think it's going to be interesting to watch it unfold.
This is the thing, right? This is the contention around what they are, right? So you are either you're either competing with the Mac, right, which I think is what they want to do, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? They should be focusing on that, competing in the wider market. I don't think they should be competing with Ubuntu or Fedora, and I like the fact that they do that. That's one of the reasons why they're so refreshing in my mind. But the underlying culture of how they're building it, they're open source guys, right? And I think they want it both ways. I think they want to build a Linux desktop that everybody loves and that everybody wants to use, but they also want it to be a competitive option in the broader market. And I don't know if you can have it both ways. I think the economic model that they're defining here is a pure example of the fact that they're more Linux desktop people than they are elsewhere. Because if they weren't tied to the Linux desktop way of doing things, they'd be creating an economic model that's more about driving kind of growth and payments and things like that. Like, to me, I just think it's naive. Like, we've already seen Ubuntu do this, and maybe that's just one model. Maybe the reason why that didn't work is because it sucked. Like that's a reasonable contention. And my goal here is not to kind of dampen down their enthusiasm. It's we just need to be realistic. Like, to me, the way this is going to work, I believe the pay what you want model will work, but there's got to be an initial reason why people are going to give money. There's got to be a driving force. People generally only pay money if there's a reason for them to pay money, right? Outside of charitable donations.
Utterly disagree.
Give me an example.
Starbucks. They have queues out the door every day. No one needs to pay $4.95 for a coffee that they can just make in their own kitchen.
I think you fundamentally misunderstand what Starbucks is selling.
I agree. They're not selling coffee. They're selling an experience. They're selling an experience, but also what they're selling is consistency. Because people that like coffee don't go to Starbucks. People that want the same thing every time in every city they go to Starbucks.
That's exactly the point.
That's what
they're selling an experience, and that's exactly what the elementary team are trying to do.
No, but the thing with Starbucks, in my mind, and the thing with McDonald's is. More so with Starbucks, what they're selling is there's a certain kind of, like, you know, coffee snobs are certainly not going to go there. Like, real coffee fans are not going to go to Starbucks.
Okay, I'll pick a different example.
But I think that the broader market, people who kind of want to go and hang out in a coffee shop, or people want to. I think there's an image that's associated with Starbucks and a generally consistent quality, and I think people are willing to pay for that. They're also buying a thing, right? There's a thing. If I go to Starbucks, right, and I buy a coffee, I'm buying precisely one coffee. You can't get a Starbucks coffee unless you give money, right? Whereas with Elementary, you can go and download the thing and not have to pay anything. And I think people, this may be a lack of faith. I think people are cheap. You're like. You know, I think people are going to say,
some people will certainly pay initially because they like just like you backed it because you like the concept and you wanted to succeed and see where it goes. So I think initially they will get some people paying for that specific reason alone. That's not a sustainable reason. That's not a sustainable model.
That's the crux of what I'm saying.
What you're paying for is the convenience and the brand value, right? It's a Veblen good. It's what they're trying to create here. The overall experience of being part of that kind of thing. Since we're arguing about Starbucks, pick Levi's, right? Are Levi's... Okay. Is a pair of Levi's jeans cost $150 better than a pair that costs $15? Yes. Is it 10 times as good? Much more arguable. What people are paying for is intangible value, brand value. And that's what Elementary are, I think, trying to create. They're trying to create a culture where people feel that brand, that experience, that overall community they're part of has value and want to reward people for it.
Which is precisely the reason why I said this is a marketing problem. They don't have that brand value. Elementary are a fraction of the user base in an already tiny user base, right? If Linux is 3%, Elementary is smaller than that, as far as I'm aware. So I agree that, to me, this is the reason why what they need to be focusing on is building that broader consumer brand value. And I think they can do it, right? This is the reason why, to me, it's not a technology problem. Because I think they have every possible opportunity to be successful in building a broader brand. I think that they can compete with the Mac. I think that they can compete with Windows, and they certainly can compete with the Linux desktop. But they need to focus on brand consistency and voicing and advertising and things like that. not just building an app store, right?
I mean,
the app store to me is a component.
You guys saw the difficulty in getting people to write apps for Ubuntu, which I have no data to back this up, but let's contend that there are a bigger install base of Ubuntu than Elementary, and they have a much larger, much broader mind share in the Linux ecosystem.
Right.
So you guys, even with Mark behind it and all the noise about Canonical and Ubuntu in general, had difficulty getting people to write apps for Ubuntu. I'm curious how they will get people to write apps for Elementary on GitHub only with the market that they currently have. Because they want the apps to be written in Vala, they want the apps to be their UX. So I think if you're already on GitHub, just add it. Doesn't really. It's not what they're looking for because they want Vala apps that conform to the UX standards of Elementary, and that's a very specific thing.
They certainly want apps that conform to the UX standards. Yeah, I don't know if they have to be in Vala, but the point is they need to be elementary. They need to be elementary apps, right?
Correct.
An app store is a necessary but nowhere near sufficient component. You can't. It's hard to go out there and say to people, "Hey, do marketing, do consumer brand awareness," and say, "Hey, you should be using Elementary." Get stuck in, and someone says, "Where do I get a podcast client from? Because I like listening to podcasts." The answer is, "Oh, you go to GitHub and then you open a terminal and type git clone whatever and then compile it," right? So if you don't have
but that hasn't been how you answer that question for any desktop Linux distribution for years.
Sure it has.
No.
Where do you get elementary apps from?
Ubuntu? You take the whatever software store they used before they wrote this. This already exists now. App Center exists now in Elementary.
You cannot right now, today, this moment, publish an app for Ubuntu that people can easily download, right? The upload your own apps as Deb's thing has gone away. No one's going to use snaps yet because they're not out there, and you can't put your app in the Ubuntu archives. You can't do that today.
Yeah, but the point is that you could at one point do this, right? I think the Canonical rolling that back. But the point is that we did this in Ubuntu, right? And it didn't work. And in the same way that we talked in the last show about Microsoft had a crack at the third viable option for the market, and it didn't, for the mobile market.
Yes,
like isn't insanity just trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results?
Right. First of all,
this is the reason why.
First of all, no, it isn't.
A slightly different thing.
Right. That quote's bullshit. So pack it in. But secondly, more importantly, this is like I say, this is a necessary but not sufficient component. If you don't have this, you can't win. But having this by no means makes it necessary or even more likely that you will win.
What worries me, because again, I know I'm being critical of some of this, and I know there's like I say, I backed the campaign, and I know that might seem hypocritical. I genuinely am supportive of these guys doing this. What worries me is that they're going to invest a ton of time and effort in building this thing out, and the backers are going to expect certain results. And right now, it seems like the mentality that I'm seeing is if you build it, they will come. And I don't believe that's the case.
Remember, what you're paying for here is not necessarily success. What you're paying for is for them to do a sprint.
Right.
Basically, they're putting the team all in one place. They've only asked for $8,000. They haven't asked for $32 million.
And they already got almost not just
to pick a number out of my head.
They're already at 107% of goal, and they still have 17 days left. They asked for $8,000. They're currently at $8,555,
which is great. What I want to see them do, what I think will help them to succeed, is they need to look at what they can offer app developers to have the best experience, not just shipping stuff on Elementary. In my mind, if I'm an app developer and I've got an application, if I'm going to even consider moving it to another platform, right, which in itself generally doesn't happen unless people are paid, right? This is another thing that we experienced at Canonical. If you want well-known apps on your platform, you have to pay those software houses to port it over, right, typically. And we didn't pay a lot of those software houses, and so we didn't get a lot of the apps. I think the Elementary guys need to sit down and use the same level of creativity they've got in thinking about the other parts of the platform and think, what is the thing that we can offer app developers? So Elementary is the place that you want it. That brand piece, what can we offer them in terms of marketing or partnerships or other stuff? That's what's going to move the needle on this. It's not going to be, hey, we got this cool OS. It kind of looks like a Mac. It's a consumer thing, honest. We're Linux people, though. And you can pay, and people can pay what they want. Like, that's great, but it's only going to get you so far, in my mind. Should we talk about Bad Voltage Live?
We shall.
We should. It's going to be glorious, isn't it?
It's going to be quite epic, I think.
I'm actually really quite excited, but then I've seen what we're going to do, and you haven't, gentle listener, nor are we going to tell you.
Yeah.
But we are going to tell you, other than the fact that it's going to be epic and you should come, we are going to tell you some of the things that are going on around the live show itself.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
So the first thing is...
One thing we should tell you, first of all, is the date and the time.
Yes.
This does seem like vital information.
3rd of March, Friday 3rd of March, in Pasadena, which apparently is not Los Angeles. It's kind of, but it is. It really is. 3rd of March, and it's going to be, our show is going to be kicking off at 8 p.m. However, the doors open at 6 p.m.
Yes.
And the doors open where, Jono? Castle Green.
Castle Green. I was in the process of typing it in.
Which is, to be clear, just a short walk from the Pasadena Convention Center, which is where Scale is held. But we should add right here, like they said, doors open at 6. You have to get there early, I think. And why do you got to get there early, guys?
There are 2 reasons, I think. The first one is that obviously you want to be sure that you're getting to see the show because it's slightly limited capacity. So if 2,000 people show up, some of you will have to stand outside and watch it on the big telly. Right, so you want to get into the room. But the second reason is, what happens at 6 o'clock?
Well, there's going to be some booze. There's going to be some not booze, and then there's going to be some taco trucks as well. So it's going to be great. So the basic plan here. So first of all, we should say a huge thank you to 2 companies right now. One is Ticketmaster, who are putting on this big party on the Friday. And helping to kind of get the show up and running. And then we also want to say a huge thank you to Linode as well, who have helped to fund getting us out there, as well as some of the stuff that we do in the show itself.
Yeah.
So
big thank you to both of them, absolutely.
Yes,
yeah.
Huge
and they've just been brilliant. Like, both companies have been absolutely brilliant all the way along.
Yes.
But one of the things that, the doors are open at 6 o'clock, which is going to be good in terms of the schedule at Scale. There's going to be nothing else going on in the evening that night. So you can finish up there. What we do recommend you do is go and drop your bags off at your hotel room, because you're not going to want to stand around with a bag. I'm not sure if there's going to be a coat check, but make sure you bring your badge, because the party is only open to Scale attendees. Okay.
Yes.
We do have a discount code if you haven't registered for Scale. So if you live near Pasadena, you don't want to go to the conference, you can go and register a ticket, and it's B-Volt. B for bad, Volt for voltage.
Yes, so come along.
Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you for that, John. Oh, yes. So, yes.
It's not a crap Nissan car, by the way. It's a discount.
So, yes,
code.
an open bar, hooray.
Yes.
We like
open taco trucks, as I understand it. The really annoying thing about the open bar is we don't get to drink any of it, because no going on stage sloshed. No. But
Yeah,
that is disappointing. And we should probably limit the taco consumption as well. But those both make me a little sad.
I don't see that that's a rule. I intend to go and eat 19 tacos before we go on stage. So
yeah, it may be a problem when your delicate English, constitution is met with the ferocity of a Los Angeles taco, and
that is a risk.
And you're crossing your legs to the entire. So.
That is actually a point. But yes, so we're on 8. So we're on 8 o'clock. We'll be off again.
Yeah,
bit after 9 probably, and then after us there is more bar, in which we will gladly join you. And then at about 9:30.
Yep, there's going to be a band called the Spazmatics, which are just so they're basically like an 80s. They're an 80s covers band, but they're kind of geek themed. They all dress up like, they look like the Revenge of the Nerds, and they put on a really good show. They're funny. They play great music. There's going to be a dance floor. There's going to be the open bar. And anyone who's been to see us live before will know that, the show itself, I think, is fun, but the after party is always really fun.
Yes.
Because everyone's hanging out. Everyone's had a good time. So yeah, it's not just about, us kind of doing our thing for an hour. It's going to be about hanging out afterwards, and we get to meet everybody, and everyone gets to meet us, and it's just a load of fun. So
absolutely love hanging out after the show. And I will say, I wasn't familiar with the Spazmatics. The look on Jono's face when they were confirmed, he was giddy like a 5-year-old. It was
They're so good. They're absolutely brilliant. They're going to be a lot of fun.
Genuinely startling. So we have this nerdcore band who I've not seen, but I'm quite looking forward to seeing them, actually.
Right. And the thing is, as well as the other thing to note, like as Ak mentioned, is so this venue is going to be a fairly biggish venue, but the space where the stage is, where we'll be performing and the Spazmatics will be performing, is a smaller part of the venue, right? So it's not going to hold everybody. So if you definitely want to get in and see the show, you really need to get there early. I'd recommend you get there at like 7:30, 8:15, because I suspect there'll be a bit of a line to get people in. And
I get there at 6:15. Or 6 o'clock, actually.
Well, get to the venue, go get your drinks and get your tacos, fuel up, and then get over to the part of the venue. And it'll be clear, like, where everything's going to be.
Right. And there is an overflow room with a TV and everything for those. If you don't make it into, don't just leave. There is there will be an area where you can watch the show. And as Zach said, the bar and taco trucks, I believe, are going to reopen after the show during the Spazmatics. So plenty to stick around for.
Yeah. It's going to be a great time.
But the overflow room's just not going to be as much fun. So, right.
Not even close.
And we can't talk too much about the show itself because it's obviously a surprise. But I think what we can say is there'll be some interesting technical discussion.
Yes.
There'll be some audience participation.
There will.
There'll be some terrible, terrible jokes.
Almost a given.
There'll be a certain amount of ranting, but there won't be, wrong in 60 seconds. We've already done that. It's going to be really fun. It'll be a proper show. This isn't like just the three of us sat on chairs talking for an hour. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a real proper show. So get along, come and hang out. It's good fun.
Yes. Now,
all right.
One of the points here is that we're going to scale, right? So I'm traveling to America, and having read a whole bunch of enormously concerning news about how people are being stopped at the border and having to have their phones unlocked and having their social media accounts and passwords demanded off them and so on, right? And even given the fact that I look like me and don't look like what border control seem to think all terrorists look like, right? It was more of a problem with, with my family 20 years ago, but now apparently I'm in the clear having red hair. Thanks. right? Bloody terrible. But I've been kind of thinking about what I can do to mitigate it. And I don't mean here politically. I don't mean what can I do by standing up against this kind of thing and putting together a thing to march against unfair privacy rules and so on. What can I do a week from now when I'm traveling to America? And one of the things I thought about is obviously I can bring like a burner phone, yeah? So I can either wipe all the data off my phone, or I can just bring another phone on which I haven't installed any of my stuff. And I can bring that, and that's cool. It would be nice if there was some kind of middle ground where I don't have to get duplicate devices, carry them over, and then use Jono's crappy Wi-Fi to copy all of my data back onto them the instant I get to California. So, now, I'm interested from the community's point of view what I can do. I'd like thoughts.
If I'm not mistaken, there is currently a thread in the forum about this. Is that correct?
Yes. I was kicking around ideas about this with you chaps, and then Graham Ben's popped up on our forum with basically the same question and the same concerns.
And obviously, like, the most important thing is presuming no lying, right? We never lie to border security, okay?
They are better at detecting lies than you are lying with almost 100% certainty.
Yeah, so don't suggest that. Like, the other thing as well is, and I hadn't cleared this with the guys before saying this, but I'm assuming you'll be okay me saying this. We actually just did a segment on this. We actually spent 25 minutes talking about this, and we found this happens from time to time when we record the show. It was a bit rambly.
It was.
And, because we got into it and there was like 3 or 4 different things that were all kind of connected. And we finished it and we thought, this is an important topic and it's an interesting topic, but we didn't feel like we did it justice in that segment. So we're not including it in this show, but we think that it's still worth a conversation. And, when we can't do a good job, you guys can. So
nice. That is the first segment we've binned in a very, very, very long time.
Very long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'd like your thoughts, software suggestions, things that I personally can do. Right. Not going to lie to border control. I can't get the law overturned in the next 10 days. Don't suggest either of those two.
Right. The other thing which I would like to know, and maybe this can be a separate topic so that on the forum, so they're not confusing, is what do you feel like is reasonable for the government to ask? Like one of the things we covered in the segment that shall not be aired was we all agree, all three of us agree, that asking for social media passwords just seems like a real overreach. And there is varying levels of opinion about whether it's okay to ask for social media usernames. Like currently, it seems like they're optionally asked for on the ESTA forms, but that will vary depending on which country you're coming from. So the question is this, right? The government arguably are going to need, or the Border Patrol are going to need, enough information so they can sufficiently assess people coming into the country. I don't think anyone's denying that. But what do you think is reasonable? Like, where do you think the line should be drawn? And don't just look at like in the segment that we talked about, there is a difference between someone like me, right, who is a white guy living in a Western country. My name is Jonathan, right? Between somebody who is either coming from one of these 7 defined countries or someone who is called Mohammed and is brown and is coming from a non-7 nation, defined country, right? There's varying levels of consideration here. So, like, don't just think about, any specific example. Like, what do you think is reasonable? Because I think that'll be a really interesting discussion for you guys to weigh in. So,
yeah, I'd be really interested in hearing people's thoughts,
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Do we have anything else? I mean, this is our last show before Scale.
It is the last show before Scale. I actually have 2 things to add if you guys don't have anything to add.
Go.
Let's do it. Go on,
One
Jeremy.
thing is a brief update from my Pico Brew review from last show. One question that came up from multiple people, both on the forums, and I think Stuart asked it during the segment, was what happens if the company goes away? Do you basically have a very expensive brick? And I contacted them once again. They responded within like 30 minutes, so really impressive response time. And they publicly committed to 2 things. One, if they were to go out of business, they would open source their software and allow the server to be run anywhere. And 2, they would release instructions on how to make your own packs from scratch. So I thought that was good that they publicly committed to both of those things as a result of my inquiry. So kudos to them.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
I mean,
we talked about
remember we talked a while back about what you should do if you're running a service where you sell devices that depend on your service. And there were certain levels of sort of kite mark approval you could give, from anyone can run their own one now to when we shut down the service, your device is a brick. And one of the suggestions that we made at that point was commit to, if we go out of business, we'll open source the stuff, and so you can run it yourself. Right. And they've done that, and that's like silver medal, excellent behaviour.
Yeah. I love how responsive they were, which I know you mentioned anyway, Jeremy, that they seem pretty responsive, but that's brilliant. It really is, so kudos to them.
And they did also note that on the price issue, it is currently $200 off. So if you were considering acquiring one, you will currently save $200.
Now, Jeremy, did you ask them for a free one that we can
I did.
keep / give away?
I did not, but I can make that inquiry if you like. I suspect
let's do it. Come on, let's do it, Jeremy.
I wish you hadn't said that on the show, because now if he gets a free one, we will actually have to give it away rather than me just trousering it and taking it back to England in 2 weeks.
All right. What was your other thing?
And then the other thing is we obviously had a guest presenter on the last show, and I think it went really well. And I'm curious on feedback, not specifically on her, because I think she was great, and I can't imagine there'd be any negative feedback there. She did an awesome job. But I'm curious what the community thinks of the concept of guest presenters in general.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys think about that, but if you, as a community, if you have any feedback on that, we already have some future guests scheduled, so hopefully the feedback is good. But I would like just a general kind of consensus on what people think of the idea in general, how often we should do it, whether we should do it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, and the other thing, I think that'd be great. And the other thing that feeds into that is one of the things we did with Christina was we thought, okay, she's a guest presenter. Let's make sure that the content on the show is mindful towards the guest, right? So, for example, we had the film segment because she's film girl. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think, or should we pick other topics, or and also even what kind of guest presenters?
Nobody is going to go, yes, I think you should talk about things the guest presenter doesn't know anything about, because that's more valuable.
That
no one is going
to say
this.
That's fair. That's fair. That was a redundant question. I take that back. Well, why don't we edit that out? And then we'll edit the Pico Brew thing out, and then we'll be golden. I'll look smarter. You'll have a brewing box. Everything will be brilliant.
But yeah, absolutely. Exactly as Jeremy says. We're interested in suggestions to some extent. What you think we should talk about, that kind of thing. So that'd be great.
Yeah. I'm looking around my room as if that's going to somehow make me think of something.
No, what we're going to do now is we're going to say, okay, Bad Voltage listeners, we'll see you in a week.
See you in
See you in
Pasadena.
See you in Pasadena.
Bye.